Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today, to be speaking with you about such an important topic and with these great colleagues. Thank you very much, JC, for the invitation. Before my time as Deputy Director General at the World Trade Organization, you can't hear me? Louder? Okay.
There we go.
All right, great. Well, I was saying it's a great pleasure to be here. It goes without saying. But before my time as Deputy Director General at the World Trade Organization in Geneva, I was on the Hill, on Capitol Hill, serving as the Chief Trade Counsel to the Ways and Means Committee of the House of Representatives for a long time. So I very much understand the parliamentary legislative focus and examination on trade policy. And I realize how important it is for legislators to be deeply engaged in trade policy. It's something that really affects the populace so deeply. And as elected officials, legislators, I think, really see and breathe that all the time. So I'm particularly glad to be talking to you in that context. I'd like to shift the focus of the discussion on economic policy just a bit from the U.S. to the multilateral rules-based system that we see embodied in the World Trade Organization, but beyond that as well. And my argument is that it's extremely important to maintain the World Trade Organization as a vital means of addressing economic policy issues and as a forum for the 166 members, the member countries, as a forum to be able to address these issues and talk among themselves. Now, you might say, well, the WTO and the system is really irrelevant because the US is engaged in unilateralism. And I would say that it's a strong argument. But I would say at the same time that the WTO is about more than tariffs. And it does allow for unilateralism. After all, it is a collection of 166 sovereigns. So each sovereign has the ability to really execute the economic policy that they want, but they have to bear the consequences under the system. I think it's fair to say, my observation from my time working in trade policy, is that there are very few, if any, members of the WTO out there that haven't violated the rules in some way. And I think that's an important point because there's a lot of focus right now on the US, and it's justified to have that focus on the US. But at the same time, the rules are very much worth saving, in my view. I think that when you look at the WTO or an organization that is in charge of the multilateral trading rules, what has not happened? What has not happened, even with the recent US unilateralism? First of all, we've seen minimal retaliation. And I think that's a very good thing. It's not because, I don't believe, countries are scared. I think it's because they have done an analysis, and you all tell me if I'm wrong, but I think many countries have done an analysis, and they have determined that to retaliate would actually cost them more in terms of the harm that it would cause to their own populace, as well as, of course, the threat of further retaliation. So what we see instead is a realistic, level-headed view, I think, by many members of the WTO, by many countries, to negotiate with the US, and also at the same time to work with each other. We see, I could tell you, the day after Liberation Day, I met with a trade minister in Geneva. I won't mention which country. She was on her way to a sudden trip that she had scheduled to meet with allies in Europe, in Australia and New Zealand, and other places as well, to sell basically products from her country to establish new alliances and new relationships. We see this happening, and we see this happening at the WTO as well. So even though the WTO is under some threat because of this retaliation, what we also see at the same time is an effort by members to double down, to strengthen the economic rule of law and the bonds among different countries. I think it's important to remember that the basic rule on tariffs, the most favored nation rule, where you are to offer to each country the same benefits with certain exceptions, but basically that's the rule. Even with the US tariffs, assuming that those are not MFN, not based on the MFN rules, if we make that assumption, still 72% of manufacturing trade and agriculture trade are still covered by MFN rules. So what that means is, despite the unilateralism in the US, the rules actually are still working pretty well. And I would say, at the same time, the WTO and the multilateral rules cover more than tariffs. They cover trade in services, intellectual property, standards, whether agriculture or industrial standards. And the WTO is also a forum for addressing some of the issues of the future, like artificial intelligence, like climate change, all of these issues that may not quite have a fully developed set of rules yet. This is the place where a lot of these discussions are starting to happen. Now, I think at the same time, I don't want to be Pollyannish about the WTO. I don't want to exaggerate its virtues or its successes. I've certainly seen firsthand that even the day-to-day work within the WTO can be quite difficult. It's an organization that's based on consensus, which means everyone has to agree, or at least agree not to disagree, on a particular issue to take action. Now, can you imagine if everyone in this room had to agree on even what to have for lunch? It would be very hard, let alone on issues that directly affect your sovereignty. But it still happens. We just had an agreement at the WTO enter into effect, the agreement on fisheries subsidies. And this was entered into by consensus. So no member objected, and most members affirmatively said that they were on board. And now at this point, it's entered into force with respect to those members who have deposited their legal instruments. In other words, they've gone to their legislatures or their cabinets to get the okay to be a formal signatory. This, to me, shows the success of the multilateral trading system in this era, that we were still able to come up with an agreement that was grounded on economic and environmental sustainability. And my plea to the legislators in the room is, if your government has not deposited its instrument in Geneva, to please do so. It's so important for the sustainability of the oceans, of fish, the livelihood of those who depend on fish, to be able to see every single WTO member having deposited. But like I said, I'm not being, I don't want to exaggerate the benefits of the WTO. And the organization is right now engaged in an exercise to reform. And it's something that I believe the WTO members take very seriously. In fact, they just spent this past week in intensive discussions about what that reform could look like. Does it affect issues of governance? Remember that consensus rule I talked about? Does it address questions of scope? Should the rules be made stronger? How do we address some of the new issues? How do we address development? All of these questions are before members in an effort to reform the organization. So it's not as if we're seeing the WTO rest on its laurels. Instead, there is an effort to try to improve. And my final comment is to say, in my view, the WTO is an organization worth saving. It must be made fit for the times, but it cannot be taken for granted. The counterfactual, if you can imagine the world without rules that are set by the WTO, even though they are sometimes violated, it would be a very brutish world indeed. So I leave you with that thought. And thank you very much for your attention.